I'm also playing on the hardest difficulty, and this fight is like reaming my ass also. Ooh!
2 hours later.
Shotgun, heal. Do this. It's gonna spawn this son of a bitch. I do this. Oh, thank God. Health time. And then I do this. No. Oh, missiles. Oh, God. I almost, my fucking sweaty ass fingers. Shotgun. Do this. Fuck you. God damn it. Evil West is so many things. A bygone relic of a forgotten time of gaming, an evolution on a cult classic, the dumbest setting played entirely straight, and you know what? Outside of a few moderate issues here and there, this game is an absolute banger. This game is an over-the-shoulder free-form brawler involving Jesse Rentier, yes, not Rentier, as one of the top agents in a secret monster hunting organization overseen by the President of the United States to hunt vampires in the Wild West. If that description didn't immediately make you invested in this game, you might want to reconsider your tastes. And the reason I call it a freeform brawler is because it's a game that doesn't really give you standard combos like most character action games. There's no light, light, heavy, light, or heavy, light, light, where you pick a combo depending on if you want mobility, hitting multiple enemies, or single target damage. You really only have one main combo. Spam left click, assuming, keyboard. Should you hold the melee button, you'll launch an enemy. Your options primarily come from the various modifiers you can apply to your inputs. Holding melee and forward causes you to launch an enemy and spike them into the ground immediately after. Holding melee and back causes you to activate a massive ground slam, spiking the enemy, and creating a shockwave once you unlock this power. And each of your moves has a purpose, a situation they work well in and one they don't. It's not too dissimilar from other character action games, but I feel more so in this game than any other that combos are less for style and slight increases in efficiency and more an absolute necessity for a strategy to work. This is where I once again proclaim my favorite pastime of hanging my balls in front of oncoming trains. I played this game on the highest difficulty, so a lot of what I say will be covered by the fact that this game was very fucking hard. Nearly every single enemy two-shots you, and the enemies themselves can be pretty tough to deal with, so developing a strategy was vital. It's definitely a lot more lax on normal, but even on hard, you do still need to plan things out a little. In a way, it kind of feels like a puzzle fighter. You have a list of resources, and you just need to find the most efficient way of shoving your resources into the enemy's faces in order to take the least amount of damage. And when I say you have moves, you have moves. I'm just gonna jump straight into the gameplay and combat because it is 90% of this experience. Everything else is frankly mediocre at best filler. Here's the moveset that I used consistently through the game. There are even more moves than this, but this is what I ended up using very often. First, as I mentioned, the melee, then launching someone and spiking them into the ground. You can also hit jump and forward in melee in order to do a leaping punch as a gap closer. You can hit your kick button to interrupt enemies who glow to stop certain attacks. You also unlock a block command that blocks everything but shockwaves, grabs, and bullets. And when you hit block in the forward command, it causes you to teleport to an enemy at pretty much any distance. Hitting block and backwards lassos an enemy and brings them right to you. All combos that come out of your blocks will stun enemies that are susceptible to it. Stunned enemies can also have a special combo done on them, which is just a flurry of punches that does a fuckload of damage. So, once I've launched enemies into the air, I can either hit the revolver button to juggle them, or I can use my punches to juggle them, or a mix of both. I was also to use the block command on a juggled enemy in order to slam them right into the ground. That's just the melee moveset. You also get a number of tools that all serve different purposes, and I would say I use them pretty regularly. First, you have a rifle and a crossbow that you can swap between, which act as a decent damage range tool. These can be used to weaken enemies, but it's primarily used for shooting weak spots to cancel certain attacks an enemy or boss will do, and also drop some extra HP when you do land those weak spot hits. Then, you have a dedicated double-barrel shotgun button. Allow me to repeat myself. You have a dedicated boomstick button. In the most genius decision since Bloodborne, this shotgun essentially acts as a counter. It hits multiple enemies in a very wide angle and staggers them all, guaranteed. Nearly every enemy in the game is able to be staggered, so this is a great opportunity to also deal some extra damage while avoiding attacks you may have a hard time with. And with an upgrade, it can also deal double damage if it's used while they're attacking as an actual counter. Also, it almost entirely one-taps shields. You have a stick of dynamite that you can throw for a similar stagger and shield breaking effect, but it's a very good damage dealer in an area on its own. Surprisingly, it's not as good as it sounds due to its long cooldown, but when it works, God, it fucking works. Then you get a get out of jail free card with a thunder flashbang that cancels basically anything and everything in the game, including bosses, with no exceptions. You also have a flamethrower available to you that's pretty good for clearing crowds and staggering the big boys, as well as making them take more damage with some of the upgrades. Lastly, this game hands you a fucking Gatling gun. This can be upgraded to give you full invulnerability while it's in use, so it's basically an I don't want to see this guy anymore button, since it can do a lot of damage. It doesn't get used for very long, you can only fire it for like 7 seconds at max, but damn it fucks. And that kind of sounds like a lot to think about. And admittedly it is, but not only are you not required to use every option all the time, this game slowly gives you everything through the course of its story that everything is introduced very well. Every single stage, you get something new. Either a new move, a new tool, or a significant upgrade to one of your tools, and it's paired alongside a slow leveling system to unlock even further new moves. So you just very slowly become a monster as you master your current moveset, and then it gets expanded on even further with the next mission. And it also helps that everything is one keybind away, or at best, 2 buttons pressed at the exact same time. And that's definitely one problem I've always had with games like Darksiders and Bayonetta. It's that I just never remember all the combos and use maybe 2 or 3 throughout the entire game, and it just ends up working out fine because, well, you could just use whatever you want and things will end up going fine, so long as you know how to use your defensive tools. So because each of these tools has its purpose, a pretty strong one at that, it just feels great to look at an encounter, die to its various phases, and then end up developing a plan on how to systematically fuck everything in the face. The best part of all this, however, is the consistency. This game has an extremely consistent set of mechanics laid out. Every enemy can be staggered. Large enemies can't be stunned 100% of the time like small ones, so you need to punch them to make them vulnerable to it first. However, it always works the same every single time you shock them. In general, vampires are weak to electricity, for some reason, and that is a trait every enemy shares. It also applies to fire, but more so electricity. Some examples of, oh shit, yeah, that makes sense it would work like that, include this one enemy who floats around and makes other enemies immune to damage. To make him vulnerable, you gotta shoot 3 orbs orbiting him and then shoot his weak spot. However, because everything is weak to fire and electricity, setting the shielded enemies on fire or stunning them removes their shield. It won't come back for a while either.
Sick me here. I have something important to say that I can't wait until I'm done fighting off this fucking cold. I ended up accidentally discovering that because the Hive Crone makes enemies glow, if you kick them, it dispels the shielding, so you don't even need to electrocute or use the flamethrower, which is especially nice for large enemies while your flamethrower is off cooldown. This makes them so much easier to deal with, and the fact that I'm still discovering things about this game quite a while after I finished playing it just makes me love this game even more. Also, because this guy is a large enemy and stun has to be built up before you can slap them up, you can just multi-phase them by slapping them first, flashbanging them to bring them right back down, and then slap them some more, and then it'll leave them with just a sliver of HP. Alternatively, because the flamethrower likes to stagger a lot, you could just light them up with the flamethrower and take off 80% of their health before they can rebuff to become invulnerable, and you have to deal with their orb mechanics again. Those were all just for one enemy.
A really fun part of this game is just discovering ways to use these mechanics in order to abuse the enemy's weaknesses, because on the difficulty I played, they will abuse the hell out of you way more. That said, while it all just sounds very overpowered to have all these tools, they all run on cooldowns. Some of them very long actually. So long in fact that you may end up only using them once per encounter, if that. And this is partially because of one mechanic I'm not super fond of. Out of combat, all your cooldowns freeze. This means during all the walking, exploring, puzzles, your cooldowns aren't refilling at all. And god, the puzzles. It's almost like this game is trying to be Uncharted between the combat encounters, with all the puzzles and animated traversal segments. But the puzzles are so easy and oftentimes so obvious that all it does is make you backtrack 10 feet to do something just before you can move on. Take this one for instance. I see a waterfall, and if I just keep going forward, I'll eventually reach a cliff, not 5 feet out, and I'll have to go grab a rope to get across. Okay, so I walk back to the entrance, go 5 feet to the left, and there's the rope, and then I walk all the way back. There was literally no point I had to do any of this. They rarely take long enough to really upset me, but they are frequent enough that it's kind of a pace killer. I definitely wouldn't want combat encounter after combat encounter, but the filler they did add is just monotonous. And with that side tangent out of the way, the major issue with cooldowns not restoring between encounters is that if you happen to use a healing item to prevent yourself from dying at the end of one tough encounter, you are punished because you have to start the next encounter with a full cooldown. One of the harder encounters I had in this game took me 90 minutes, and a good chunk of that was because I just didn't have access to a healing item for half the encounter, simply because it was the first encounter of the level, and I had finished the previous level having just used my healing item. I can understand the desire to make resource use decisions matter so you don't just go through the cycle every single time of using your strongest shit to get it out of the way, but at the very least, the heal should be replenished every encounter. It does at least give you the leniency of fully healing you after every combat encounter. So, with all the tools out of the way, the basics are pretty straightforward. You have a soft lock-on when you attack, which essentially locks you into a one-on-one fight with the enemy. Due to the tight camera, you do lack peripheral vision to other enemies around you, but there are sound cues and visual indicators to let you know that an enemy is actively attacking your direction. While engaged in combat, you do have both a sidestep to stay in the enemy's face, and a roll that is executed by hitting the dodge button twice. And that lets you get out of the way of big AoEs and other stuff. Generally, the roll will always work. The only time it really doesn't function as an iframe device is certain attacks, which I think kind of just can't be iframed at all. And these are mostly explosions. Your block, however, allows you to take a hit from any non-grab melee, and it's capable of shocking enemies. This is pretty good for defending yourself when dodging isn't so much of an option, or if there's a lot of shockable enemies. While it seems like both tools might be a bit redundant, they kind of aren't. The dodge allows you to get out of the way of explosions, bullet enemies, and avoid grabs if you fail to interrupt them, or other similar attacks which can't be blocked. But blocking allows you to stick to someone's ass and keep the action going a lot easier than the sidestep, with the added bonus that the moment they can be shocked, they will be. Plus, the block is safer even if dodging works against more things, just due to how spammable the block is. Once you get the ability to block projectiles, it just gets even better. This game very much loves to put you on the spot with how you interact with enemies. When it comes to true one-on-one encounters, it's not too bad. Problem is, this game throws several enemies at you at any given time. These enemies can be pretty nasty too. There's two main classes of enemies you'll be dealing with: normal enemies and large enemies. Large enemies are often introduced as if they were their own boss encounter, but trust me, these are not bosses. Their encounters are just so you can get used to their mechanics in a more controlled and slower paced environment before they start using them literally everywhere. Generally, you only have one large enemy per wave at most that you have to dance around, because while elites are the primary threat, having 4 little assholes slapping you doesn't really help at all. Naturally, the normal enemies are much easier to deal with, since they can be stunned and moved around a lot better. More importantly, you can spike them into various obstacles around the map, often resulting in an instant kill, or at bare minimum, 80% of their HP disappearing. But don't think that the small enemies aren't a threat at all though. You do just get better at the game. They are still very nasty. they can be aggressive with ranged attacks, have attacks meant to throw you off, like dodging you followed by slapping you, which you have to be quick to interrupt, and they also tend to have special moves that make your life fun, unless you use your gun to cancel it, like attacking way faster, buffing enemies, or healing enemies. But more importantly, there is one fun property to normal enemies. Large enemies count as objects you can launch them into. And holy shit, this is the best feature ever. As the game ramps up and you go from fighting small hordes of normal enemies to large hordes of these enemies, plus one or two larger enemies, the normal enemies become less of an issue and more ammo. Not only is it a free stagger, but it also tends to instantly kill the normal enemy and build up shock vulnerability on the large enemy quite well. Mix this with your teleport and pull, and you can just dance around the arena, keeping your distance from the large guy while you clean up the small guys and dealing damage to the large enemies at the exact same time. It gets even more satisfying when you unlock a perk that makes enemies you spike fucking explode. Like, not into like a mist of red goo because you hit them so hard. No, you apparently in a split second give them a goddamn nitroglycerin enema because they fucking turn into a fireball. And yes, there is an upgrade system in this game. One for the character that uses perk points granted from leveling up or finding secrets, which grant passive bonuses to you or your moves, as well as granting new moves altogether. For your weapons, the upgrades are purchased with cash, which you get from leveling up or finding secrets. These can either give your weapons new mechanics, or just buff out the stats a bit. A big problem is that almost all of these upgrades are just good. This game is actually very well balanced and thought out because of how enticing they made every last one of these upgrades. The reason this is a problem is because without being a detailed explorer, you won't get enough money to buy most of the weapon upgrades, and you'll only reach level 20 by the end of the story with a few extra perks granted from secrets. It makes the progression feel super slow, since this game is tough enough as is on the harder modes, and you know that you could make damn good use out of any of these upgrades if you just were that little bit closer to getting it. There's also one upgrade I'll give a shout out to because holy shit it is good on evil difficulty. The max health upgrade. That might seem obvious, but it's just 15% extra max health. So what? Enemies take off like 70% of my health with one attack, if not all of it, so what's the big deal? Yeah, that's what I thought as well, but the enemy damage is actually really well balanced, so that from full, taking 2 hits from most enemies will leave you at 5% health remaining if you get this upgrade. So basically, you can pretty consistently take an extra hit before dying. I genuinely did not think they would consider the higher difficulties when making this game, and just made it oppressively hard with random high numbers because lol, lamau, cock and ball torture. But no, this game is honestly pretty well balanced. Yes, it's insanely hard, but it doesn't feel arbitrarily hard, like they just raised enemies' health and damage to insane degrees, or enemies are just full of random bullshit, or ignoring things you can do. In general, every single enemy in this game is a fair fight. Their mechanics are consistent. They only have a handful of moves they can do, so you don't really have to know too much about their movesets. But they still have unique mechanics that make it so you can't just turn off your brain when you see them. They still feel fair, even when there's multiple large enemies at once, because you can always change your approach. The final level is actually the best example for this. The first wave throws 4 shield enemies at you alongside a wave of small enemies. And the next wave is 3 large bat motherfuckers at the same time, of which this enemy type I personally feel is the hardest of the large enemies. The first wave was definitely a little hell because the shield enemies constantly sent out shockwaves and charged at you, but between launching enemies into them, using your shotgun to break multiple shields at once, and utilizing the hell out of that TNT, it went by pretty painlessly. The giant bats are pretty aggressive, but surprisingly, when they're at a distance, they will maintain that distance until they want to pounce on you. I found that I rarely had to deal with 2 or more at once, so I just had to keep an ear out for their projectiles, or when they go to heal, I can take the opportunity to get some health off them by shooting their weak spot. Like, everything about this game is just so much more clear and predictable than you'd expect for how chaotic it might seem. Despite having a limited field of view, I'm somehow able to just feel when someone's gonna put a dick in my ass, and dodge accordingly. It also pulls some tricks to make you safer than you otherwise would be, like giving nearby enemies, even large ones, a stagger when you go for the special stun combo, or certain projectiles expiring if you were able to stun or kill the enemy. But for as much praise as I can give the enemy encounters, the bosses on the other hand can suck my dick. Mostly. They are very close to having some great mechanics, but there's something that gets in the way of them from just being good fun. The first boss is actually basic and okay, nothing really good or bad, I would say. I enjoyed it. It took a little too long. The second boss can eat my ass. Their phases are basically random. There's little consistency in what the boss does. Sometimes it'll go for a full combo, then immediately retreat. Sometimes it'll cut the combo early and just sit there. Sometimes it might end its combo and just continue it again. It spawns somewhat tanky minions that heal this boss, who has a lot of HP as is, which they're easy to deal with if the boss doesn't immediately rush you down the moment it re-enters the arena, which it does. Sometimes. Other times it'll choose to fire off varying amounts of projectiles and spawn varying amounts of extra minions. Noticing a trend? I'm convinced this boss is just bugged to hell. If it wasn't for it being super inconsistent, I think this would actually be a good fight. And the third boss is actually really close to being great. I love bosses where the boss mimics your character's abilities somewhat, and for the most part this is good. The only issue I have is how dumb one phase can get. I personally found it just weird to figure out. They shoot these waves of leeches that you can't dodge through, that kind of fan out before they home in on you, but right before they reach you, they bunch up again, so it took me way too long to realize you can in fact dodge them. Then, after that, he begins alternating between shooting leeches that move at you and leeches that move away from you, so that you have to dodge one wave and then just keep walking to avoid the next. Then after that one, he will alternate those same leeches until he just fires off 2 waves of leeches that do not follow this pattern whatsoever, and I still cannot figure out how to dodge them. I'm partially convinced that the tracking on those last 2 waves is bugged, but it's so consistent. The last boss is actually great. It is weird because it ignores mechanics established by the rest of the game though. Every attack is a shockwave, so it can't be blocked. Its grab is the only grab in the game with no interrupt glow. It's the only boss who drops health pickups when you interrupt it with a kick. Like, this game is just so close to being perfectly fine with little bullshit fuck this one thing you could do in particular kind of moves. But at least it's still a good fight. It's just weird they went this direction. Like, the problems it has aren't even that bad once you realize it. It's just weird. But going back to the passives, however, how you build your character can actually make a significant difference in your playstyle, more than I thought. This is because many passives and upgrades dictate how you generate pickups and what you may or may not do with them. For me, I generally went defensive, grabbed passives that let me generate a lot of health pickups, got weapon upgrades meant to increase the amount of staggers I put out with the dynamite, shotgun, and my slam, and I focused on energy generation, primarily through electrocuting enemies and juggling them, so I had some upgrades to help me do more damage to enemies who are juggled, and I also got a juggle finisher. I would get enough energy for a couple slams and maybe one use of the supercharger every encounter. My friend, however, showed me his setup, and it was kind of funny how different of an approach he took. He went all in on energy regen. All his pickups were converted into energy, so he would have so many ways of generating energy. Basically, anything he did gave him energy. He then spec'd more heavily into using that energy, spammed supercharge, spammed heavy slams, spammed heals because while you get one heal charge, you eventually get a fucking ridiculous upgrade to use energy to heal instead. And because it's a very early upgrade that makes your healing power give you 5 seconds of invulnerability, it could be hard to kill him sometimes. And you might think he would be in a rough spot health-wise because all of his healing turned to energy, but nope. He has an upgrade that makes health orbs give energy, and vice versa. And while it sounds like a crazy overpowered ability to be invulnerable on heal, consider how long the healing cooldown is. I actually loved that it was another option I had to just pop a heal even if I didn't need it, just to get something done safely. But the energy to heal upgrade is just kinda silly when you get a lot of energy regeneration. It definitely made this game significantly more tolerable.
Now, I'm sure many people will draw comparisons to the God of War reboots, which is fair. I can see it on a surface level, but the more cultured among us will probably make a more apt comparison.
That's right, bitches. This is fucking God Hand. From the dumb theme, the very claustrophobic freeform combat, to the way some of the moves like the stun combos are handled, and the fact that you just have the God Hand, Like, Jesse's gauntlet is the only thing giving him these stupid powers somehow, and you can just supercharge it to go hog wild, flying at enemies for 8 seconds. It just screams God Hand to me. And man, I could not be happier because God Hand is a fucking gem. And true to God Hand, this game also feels like it belongs on the PlayStation too. Like, there's just so many decisions that you may see here and there still, but never all at once like this, ever since like the Xbox 360 days. Bad checkpointing for encounters that require you to either watch unskippable encounter cutscenes, keep in mind all the other cutscenes are completely skippable, or you still have to do very small amounts of puzzling every single time you die. Audio logs that you can't listen to while playing the game. Completely pointless and simple puzzle solving for the sake of just adding extra variety. And there's a distinct lack of freedom where every last jump and ledge drop has to be facilitated by a context action, where in some cases, it just looks so dumb that you couldn't get past something without vaulting over it when you could just walk around. Also, there's arbitrary points of no return. It just feels so gamey in a really nostalgic way, actually. Granted, I wish none of it was in this game because almost all of these take away from the experience. So, now we can move on to the last 10% of the game. The campaign. It's actually nothing special, which should immediately disqualify this game from any kind of praise because it somehow managed to take Wild West secret government organization vampire hunters and make it fucking bland. Like, the world itself is cool, the ideas at play are great. Artistically, this game is a feast for the eyes, with nearly every chapter sending you to some visually distinct location, which is something Flying Wild Hog has gotten way too good at lately. Even if you might return to a geographically similar place like a forest, it'll have some different take. One is a thick, rainy forest filled with massive oversized leeches sucking on all the trees. And the last time they use a forest is all the way up in the mountains with lots of cave features that all run along a river. The final level is probably one of the most satisfying backdrops to end a game on. You're just fighting your way through a burning opera house. But the way the story is presented is just a big missed opportunity. They could have taken the acting so far, just gone so stupid with it. But instead, they played this game entirely seriously without the writing to really support it. So while the cutscenes that push the story forward keep me engaged, it's only keeping me engaged enough to just want to know what happens next. I'm very much not excited to keep listening to these characters, and the voice acting is also a mixed bag. Jesse's okay at best, and at worst he can sound like he was half asleep with some of the recordings. There are still some really good performances though. It's all just played so seriously. The only scenes I really remember, several days after beating this game, involve maybe 2 characters who absolutely hammed it up.
I don't think she did all that for just Abano. We're missing something. I bet my last buck we'll hear more from this Felicity tick pretty soon. I'm gonna check if Amelia needs some backup with Harrow.
Who do I have to bend over this bar and indiscreetly fuck to get some coffee around here?
What a day. See you in the briefing room.
And the music has to be the single most disappointing part of this game. It's just bland. The music during many fights is just generic, low rumbling, serious music in this game about the Wild West. I'm a sucker for spaghetti western style music, and the fact that there's next to none in this game hurts me to my very soul. I got so fed up with it that I just started blasting God Hand music. And you know what? It made this game better. And this is coming from someone who fucking loved every last track from the previous Flying Wild Hog game, Shadow Warrior 3, to the point where, on a second channel, I basically ripped every last goddamn song from that game and posted it for archival purposes, because I just want to listen to that shit. So saying that this Flying Wild Hog game has just completely forgettable music makes me sad. And really the last things of note in this game is that, quite frankly, it's actually pretty polished. Flying Wild Hog tend to release different forms of jank. fairly buggy here and there, but this game has actually been very smooth. I encountered one crash, maybe one audio issue in my whole playthrough. The only issues I encountered were occasional soft lock-on braking on the large bats, making them ice skate around you when they're attacking, which also made hitting them really weird until you lock onto something else. And this one fight where if you teleport to this one enemy in this one encounter, you'll just teleport halfway into the floor. Also, whatever the fuck the second boss is doing, I'm still not sure if that's bugged or if that's just intentional. The only repeatable bug I've seen is in the mission Lightning in a Bottle. At the very end, something in this encounter just breaks, meaning it cannot be finished and you have to restart. For me, it only took one try, but I watched my friend try it 6 or more times before it worked. My only guess is that sometimes enemies just fucking vanish without counting as dying, since I did watch one pop away right before my eyes. So, that's Evil West. Frankly, this is contender for the best game I've played all year, with its fucking hard, but overall really fair combat. The mechanics and moves you have at your disposal are just so fun to use. I never thought Poland would be the ones to come through on anything close to a God Hand successor, but by God, they fucking did it. Somehow Polish developers constantly make games that are exactly up my shit.